Hi, and welcome to Chapter 16 in our text, Lewis Vaughn's Doing Ethics. This chapter is on terrorism, and this is our last chapter. So, in order to talk about the moral issue of whether terrorism is ever justified, we first need an operational definition of terrorism. So for our purposes, I think it's safe to keep it as simple as possible and to say that terrorism or terror consists of using violent acts against one person or group of people with the intention to intimidate or coerce through fear. Now, as your text points out, terrorism is not only a contemporary issue. It was actually, at least in Western civilization, the French Revolution that gave us state-sanctioned terrorism. It's also important to keep in mind that terrorism is simply a means to an end, and it can be used by many different agents and adopted for many different objectives. So for example, we might look at Robin Hood, typically a hero figure, really as a terrorist. Even though his ends were, some would say, good, the means by which he went about it were those of terrorism. So the central question of this chapter is whether terrorism can ever be morally justified, and unfortunately there is no easy answer to the question. So I will let you go through the readings and make up your own mind, but I do want to highlight a couple different perspectives on terrorism. So let's first look at consequentialist view of terrorism, in which terrorism really is judged simply by the results that it achieves. And the results that are achieved, of course, depend on the good that is being sought. So lives lost can be morally justified. Lives lost through terror can be morally justified if consequentialists can show that a greater good is achieved. So let's look at non-consequentialist approaches now. They're a little more complex, and actually there are three basic positions that non-consequentialists adopt. The first is that terrorism is morally justified if it is the only way to achieve some equitable distribution of rights among people in society. Or in other words, if basic human rights and the sanctity of life can be preserved for all, despite the sacrifice that may have to be made by specific individuals. The second position that non-consequentialists hold is that terrorism is morally justified in the case of supreme emergency or moral threat. And one of the common examples that's cited by non-consequentialists who hold this position is the bombing of Germany during World War II. That it looked as if Germany were going to win, and the idea of a Europe, or even more of the world dominated by someone like Hitler, was just morally reprehensible. Therefore, acts of terror were justified. Other broader examples that non-consequentialists who hold this position would point to would be genocide or enslavement. And the third position that non-consequentialists hold is that absolutely positively in no circumstances is terrorism ever justified, that the sanctity of life overrides any possible benefits that may come from the use of terror. So again, I just want you to keep in mind that, first of all, this is not a contemporary issue. It is not an easy issue to grapple with, and that when you think about terrorism, try to think about it as a means or a political program, and not necessarily something that simply the enemy or the other adopts. So thank you, happy reading.